I'm 72 years old, and honestly, the last thing I ever imagined feeling on a cold Friday night in December was that Cincinnati wind slicing right through my coat like it had it out for me personally. Still, there I was, standing out on the front porch of the house, the same house I'd worked years to pay off, all 4 bedrooms of it, those solid oak floors, and even that new water heater I installed just 6 months ago with these same stiff, arthritic hands, watching my son, Edward, shut the door in my face like I was some Jehovah's Witness he didn't have the time or patience for. And, just like that, welcome back to Dad's true revenge. Go ahead, grab something to snack on, settle in, and keep this in mind. The folks in these stories had every opportunity to act right. They just made the wrong choices. Drop a comment if you feel like it, and don't forget to subscribe. Trust me, you're gonna enjoy this. The snow that night wasn't gently falling. It felt more like it was coming at me, aggressive, almost personal. Dad. That was the final word he said before that door clicked shut. Not, I'm sorry, not, I'll call you tomorrow. Just, Dad. Like even my name was too much trouble. Like I was nothing more than a footnote he didn't feel like reading. What I didn't realize in that moment was that the sound of that door closing would turn out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me. But let me rewind about 20 minutes, because you really need the full picture before you decide who the bad guy is here. And just to save you some guessing, it's not me. For the past 3 years, I'd been living in the Westwood neighborhood of Cincinnati with Edward and his wife, Monica Bennett. The plan was simple. It was supposed to be temporary, just until my knees healed up after surgery. That's what we agreed on. That was the deal. Apparently, Monica Bennett had a completely different version of that arrangement playing out in her head. I could see it building for months, the way she'd let out a quiet sigh every time I walked into the kitchen, or how she'd accidentally sit in my usual chair at the dinner table, then give me this look like I was the one being unreasonable for expecting to sit there. Little things, you know. Small cuts dressed up to look like politeness. But on that Friday, December 9th, and yeah, I know Wednesday would have been more poetic, but life doesn't work like that, she finally dropped the act. I was in my room, that small one off the hallway that used to be nothing more than a storage closet before Edward cleared it out for me, when I heard them arguing in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen in or anything. The walls in that house are about as thin as a bad excuse. He's not even sick. Monica Bennett's voice had this practiced tone to it, calm enough to sound reasonable but sharp enough to cut deep. He walks around here like it's his house. It was my house, or at least it used to be. We're the ones making the payments now, she said. I'd made 2 full years of payments on that place before I handed Edward the deed. But sure, past tense, right? I sat there on the edge of my bed while my daughter-in-law tore apart 40 years of my life in about 11 minutes flat. I'll give her credit. She was thorough. It was like she had a whole presentation ready. Honestly, I half expected her to pull up a PowerPoint. She covered everything. The Medicare costs, grocery bills, how I'd taken over the living room, even the fact that I had opinions about how she was raising her kids. And, for the record, all I ever said, once, was that maybe the boys shouldn't be eating cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row. That's it. Once. He needs to go, Edward. He has options. He's 72. Plenty of people his age live on their own. She paused for a second. Or there are places that could help. Facilities. That word hit me heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. She meant a nursing home. That's what she'd been looking into. My daughter-in-law had been sitting there, quietly researching where to find somewhere else for me to stay, like I didn't belong there anymore, taking up too much space. So I stood up, grabbed my coat, the old brown one Violet bought me back in 2003 from a little shop on Reading Road that's been a vape store for years now, and I didn't overthink it. I just moved. I walked out of that cramped little room, down the hallway, past all those family photos on the wall, photos with me in them, smiling like a fool who had no clue what was coming, and stepped into the kitchen. Monica Bennett went quiet the second she saw me. Edward wouldn't even look up. just stared at the floor. "I heard enough," I said, calm and steady. "No shaking, no drama." "I'll get out of your way." "Dad, don't—" I held up my hand to stop him. "I'm not doing that scene where you apologize and we all pretend she didn't say what she said. I'm too old for that." Monica Bennett lifted her chin. "Nobody's asking you to." "Monica Bennett," I said, looking her straight in the eye, "you've been asking me to leave since Labor Day. I'm just finally paying attention." I went back to my room, grabbed the go-bag I'd kept packed for the last 15 years, old habit from a life I never really shared with Edward, and headed for the front door. That's when she said it. And I want you to remember this part, because I sure as hell do. "You can't stay here anymore." She didn't whisper it, didn't say it in a way she could take back later and blame on stress. No, she said it loud and clear, like she'd been holding on to it for a while. Edward didn't say a word, so I opened the front door and stepped out into that Cincinnati winter night, Friday night to be exact, and let it hit me. Now, let me tell you something. Westwood at 9 p.m. in December is no place for a 72-year-old man with bad knees to be standing around. The streets were quiet, Christmas lights glowing on porches, doing their best to look cheerful while I stood there on the sidewalk trying to figure out what my next move was. The truth is, I always had a next move. I just never thought I'd need it that night. I started walking west along Montana Avenue, heading toward the community center near the corner of Boudinot, not because I had some solid plan, but because my feet seemed to know something my brain hadn't caught up with yet. Then my phone buzzed. Edward. I looked at his name on the screen and let it ring. A couple blocks later, the cold started to feel different. My left knee, the bad one, locked up when I hit a patch of ice outside that old barbershop and I nearly went down. Didn't hit the ground completely. I caught myself on a parked car, but it was enough to shake me. I stood there for a minute, breathing out steam into the dark, snow collecting on my shoulders. Here's the thing about getting old that folks in their 30s just don't understand yet. It's not the big losses that break you down. It's the little ones, the quiet humiliations. It's that moment when you realize your own body is starting to side with the people who think you're finished. I pulled out my phone, not to call Edward, and not to call anyone who'd make me explain myself that night. Instead, I dialed Alvarez. Officer Victor Alvarez, 23 years with the Cincinnati PD. He was the first officer who showed up the night Violet died back in '94, another December that felt just like this one. He didn't just do his job and leave either. He brought me coffee, stuck around until sunrise, and never once pushed me to answer anything I wasn't ready to say. He didn't owe me a thing. But somehow, over the last 30 years, he turned into the guy I called whenever the world stopped making any kind of sense. "Mikal," he answered on the second ring. "It's 10 o'clock. 9:43, I corrected him after a short pause. "Where are you?" "Montana and Boudinot. I fell a little." "You fell?" "Not all the way. Mostly I just—" My knee throbbed hard enough to rewrite the sentence for me. "Alvarez, I might need a minute here." I could already hear him moving, keys jingling, a door opening, like he didn't need any more explanation than that. At the time, I didn't realize that in about 4 hours, Edward would be getting a phone call that would drag everything Monica Bennett thought she'd buried right out into the open. Everything I'd spent 30 years quietly building was about to step into the light whether I liked it or not. "Stay on the line," Alvarez told me. "Don't move." The snow kept coming down on Boudinot Avenue, and somewhere in all of that, 3 decades worth of secrets were getting ready to stop being secrets. There's a certain kind of cold you only get in Cincinnati in December, the kind that doesn't just make you shiver, it feels like it's questioning you. Sitting there on the hood of some stranger's parked Buick, my bad knee pulsing like a metronome set to misery, I had more than enough time to let that cold start asking its questions. Why didn't you tell him, Arthur Bennett? 30 years. That's how long I'd been keeping it all under wraps. Tuesday night foundation meetings, quietly moving money where it needed to go, building something meaningful in Violet's name while Edward figured I was just an old man killing time watching the History Channel and clipping coupons. 3 decades of hiding the most important thing I'd ever done from the one person who probably should have known, because deep down, I knew he'd make it about himself, or Monica Bennett would twist it into something about money. And Violet, she deserved better than that. Alvarez pulled up in exactly 11 minutes. I counted. His department-issued Ford looked almost unreal in all that snow, like some kind of spaceship dropping in. The headlights cut straight through the dark on Boudinot, like God had finally decided to answer a message I'd sent hours earlier. He stepped out without turning on the flashing lights. Alvarez never cared much for making a scene. In 23 years with Cincinnati PD, he'd handled things the way a skilled surgeon does, quiet, precise, and never for show. He took one look at me sitting on that Buick hood and had the nerve to almost smile. "You look terrible," he said. "I've looked worse." "Yeah," he nodded, stepping closer. He glanced at my knee, quick and professional, but didn't touch it. 1994 comes to mind. That one hit deep. December 1994, the night Violet died. Back then, I was sitting in a hospital hallway in Clifton, still in my factory clothes, barely able to string together a sentence that made any sense. Yeah, I definitely looked worse that night. "Can you walk?" Alvarez asked. I made it 2 blocks in a blizzard with a bad knee and most of my dignity still intact. So, yeah, I can walk. "Mostly intact," he repeated. "Don't push it." He helped me to the car anyway, not because I absolutely needed it, well, not entirely, but because he knew the difference between helping someone and making them feel helpless. He treated me like a partner, not a patient, hand on my elbow, steady and respectful, no unnecessary commentary. I eased into the passenger seat, and he turned the heat on without even asking. What I didn't know at that moment was that just a couple miles away, over at the Westwood Community Center on Boudinot, something had already been set in motion, something that would make every quiet decision I'd made over the years feel like it had been leading straight to this exact Friday night. "You want to tell me what happened?" Alvarez asked as he pulled onto Montana. "Monica Bennett happened." He nodded slowly, like a man who'd heard that name used as a diagnosis before. "She finally did it," I said. No hesitation, like she'd been practicing. Alvarez's jaw tightened just a bit. "And Edward?" I looked out the window, watching the snow slowly bury Westwood, inch by inch. "Edward just stood there," I said, like someone watching a car crash he already decided wasn't his problem. The silence that followed had weight to it. "Where do you want to go, Arthur Bennett?" Truth is, I should have said a hotel, or maybe my attorney's office over on Erie Avenue, anywhere that wouldn't turn my quiet, carefully guarded life into something people talked about on the evening news. "Just drive," I told him. "Give me 10 minutes to think." So he drove. That was one of his strengths. He could be there for you without making a big show of it. We rolled through Westwood in the snow, passing the barber shop, the church on Epworth, that little Dominican spot on the corner where I'd been getting rice every Sunday for the past 12 years. Then he slowed down. "Arthur Bennett. I see it." "The Westwood Community Center?" I said, leaning forward. "The same building on the corner of Boudinot and Epworth, the one where I personally paid for the HVAC system back in 2019 because the kids were sitting inside wearing coats, was lit up like it was Easter morning. Cars lined both sides of the street. People stood outside in the snow, not just a few, but hundreds of them, bundled up in coats and scarves, holding candles against the wind, filling the parking lot and spilling onto the sidewalk. A silent crowd, right in the middle of a Friday night snowstorm, with no business being there. And yet, there they were. I just stared. "When did you—" I started. "I made a call," Alvarez said quietly. "When you called me, I made a call." "Alvarez, you built that place, Arthur Bennett, he said, his voice calm but firm, like he was holding something back. "Hell, you built half this neighborhood. You think I was going to let you sit out in the snow on a car hood and not tell anybody?" I tried to feel mad about it. I really did. I reached for some kind of indignation. But sitting there in that warm car, looking out at all those people standing in the cold with candles for a man they thought might be in trouble, I couldn't find a single ounce of anger. "Who did you call?" I finally asked. "Deacon Harold Whitaker. At first, after that, it kind of took on a life of its own." "Took on a life of its own?" "That's how these things go," he said, pausing for a second. "There are 2 news vans out there, Arthur Bennett. I need you to be ready for that." "News?" I turned and looked at him. "Alvarez, I'm wearing a 30-year-old coat." "It's a good coat." "It is," I admitted. "Violet picked it out." Just saying her name changed the air a little. Alvarez noticed that. He always did, and gave it a moment to settle. "They know about the foundation?" I asked. "The neighborhood's always known," he said. "Everybody knew. Arthur Bennett. Except Edward." That truth sat heavy and warm in my chest all at once. Everybody knew, except my own son. I'd spent 30 years hiding something from him, while an entire neighborhood quietly protected it for me. Getting me inside wasn't easy. Alvarez wanted to call in medical. My knee had swollen up enough that walking had become more of a negotiation, but I waved him off. There was no version of that moment where I was getting rolled in on a stretcher. Not that night. I made it inside on my own, slow and steady, with Alvarez at my left side and that old brown coat of mine doing everything it could to hold the line. The second the door opened, the room went quiet, but not the awkward kind. This was different. It was the kind of silence that happens when a whole room's been holding its breath, just waiting for something to let it finally exhale. I started recognizing faces right away. There was Sandra Lopez from the after-school program over on Work Road, old George Collins, who ran the Thursday night reading circle, and those 3 women from the Eleanor Bennett Scholarship Committee, the ones who never missed a June, always sending handwritten thank you notes like clockwork. There were teachers, parents, even teenagers who didn't know me personally, but had been brought along by people who did. Then somebody started clapping. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I handled that moment with grace. I'm 72 years old. My daughter-in-law had just thrown me out of my own house. My knee was swollen up like a cantaloupe. And now I had a room full of people applauding me in the middle of a snowstorm. All because they knew my wife's name. I looked up at the ceiling for a second. Old habit. Helps keep things from spilling over. "All right," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "All right now. Everybody go on home before you catch pneumonia. Violet would be mad as hell at every one of you." That got a laugh. Real laughter. The kind that cracks tension wide open. They got me settled in the back office. Between Alvarez and Sandra Lopez, they eased me into a chair and propped my leg up, and someone handed me a cup of coffee strong enough to probably file my taxes if I asked it to. Out front, the crowd slowly started drifting back out into the snow, reluctantly, like they didn't really want to leave. The news crews, though, they stayed. What I didn't know yet was that about 14 miles away, in a house on Maplewood Avenue in Westwood, a TV was on, and a woman named Monica Bennett was watching the 11 o'clock news with the kind of look people get when their carefully built version of reality starts cracking down the middle. Alvarez stepped back into the office and quietly shut the door behind him. He had his phone in his hand. "He's on his way," he said. I looked up at him. "You called Edward." "I called Edward." I let out a slow breath through my nose. "And what exactly did you tell him?" "I told him his father was found struggling out in the cold on Boudinot Avenue," Alvarez said, "and that he needed to get to the community center immediately." He paused. "Might have left out a few details." "A few?" "Most of them." I glanced down at my coffee and shook my head a little. "You're a good man, Alvarez. You really are." "How long?" I asked. 20 minutes, he said. "Maybe 15 if he runs lights." 15. If he panicked. I leaned back in that chair, sitting in the back office of a building that had my wife's name mounted outside in letters 3 feet tall, letters my own son had apparently never slowed down enough to read. And I thought about what I was going to say to him when he walked through that door. Turns out, nothing. Not because I was angry, and not because I wanted to punish him, but because sometimes, when the moment finally comes, words just aren't necessary. Some truths speak for themselves. Out beyond the office door, I could hear the news crews setting up. I could hear Sandra Lopez talking to someone, her voice steady and proud, saying things like, 30 years, 14 schools, 3 states. I could hear the building itself, too. The floors I'd refinished, the roof I'd replaced, the gym I paid for back in 2011. It all seemed to breathe around me like it knew something big was about to happen. On the wall across from me, just visible through the office's small interior window, I could see part of it. The portrait. Violet. Painted by a local artist back in 2018. I commissioned it anonymously, of course. 6 feet tall, framed in dark mahogany. She was laughing in that painting. That's how I always held on to her. Not the hospital version, not those last months, not December of '94. No, this was before all that. Young, happy, wearing that yellow dress she had on the summer Edward was born. Underneath the portrait, carved straight into the wall in letters I chose myself, were the words, "Built by Thomas Bennett. In love, in silence, forever. Arthur Bennett." I used the name Thomas Bennett as a nod to my father. It's the name I signed on every single foundation document for 30 years, the name the whole neighborhood knew me by, except my own son, until tonight. I heard the front door of the community center open. The crowd outside, the ones who hadn't left, the ones who weren't going anywhere until they knew I was all right, fell quiet again. Then I heard footsteps, fast ones. I picked up my coffee and waited. You can tell a lot about a person just by how they walk, if you know what to listen for. Violet used to say that all the time. She could tell exactly how I was feeling just by the sound of me coming down the hallway, whether I was tired, worried, or trying to pretend I wasn't either. 30 years later, sitting there with a bad knee and a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm, I heard my son's footsteps crossing that community center floor, and I knew exactly what I was hearing. Panic. Not grief, not guilt. Panic. Those were the footsteps of a man who'd just been told his father was found half-conscious in a snowstorm, and had spent the entire drive over thinking about what that might mean for him. I knew my son. I raised him. I knew the difference between his worried walk and his scared one, and what was coming through that door wasn't worry, it was fear of consequences. I didn't move. I just sat there, holding that lukewarm coffee, waiting for the man I raised to walk straight into the truth I'd spent a lifetime building. The office door swung open. Edward filled the doorway, broad shoulders, same as mine, standing there like he owned the space. For about 3 seconds, he looked at me like a man who'd spent the whole drive rehearsing what he was going to say. Then his eyes drifted past me, through the window, and landed on the portrait. And just like that, whatever speech he had prepared disappeared. I watched it happen right in front of me, saw the words drain out of him, saw his face shift the way it does when the world suddenly rearranges itself without warning. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. One hand stayed gripping the doorframe like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Dad. The word came out thin, uncertain, like a question he didn't even understand yet. Edward, I said, keeping my voice steady, the way you keep a table from wobbling when one leg's shorter, making those quiet little adjustments so it doesn't tip over. Sit down before you fall down. He didn't sit. Instead, he stepped into the office slow, like the floor might give out under him. His eyes kept drifting, first to the window, then to Violet's portrait, then back to me, then right back to that painting again. The yellow dress, her laugh, the words carved into the wall beneath her, built by Thomas Bennett, in love, in silence, forever. That's, he started, then stopped to swallow. That's Mom. Dad, that's... He pressed his fingers against his mouth for a second, trying to steady himself. How long has she been on that wall? Since 2018. He blinked. 2018. October, I said. They unveiled it on her birthday. Nice ceremony. Weather held up for once. He kept blinking like his brain was trying to catch up to something it wasn't ready for. You put her there. I paid for the portrait, yes. You... He stopped, then tried again. Dad, what is this place? And there it was. The question I'd been avoiding for 30 years without ever technically lying about it. I never lied to him. I just never handed him the whole truth. There's a difference. A thin one, maybe. But it's there. I set my coffee down on the desk and folded my hands. Sit down, Edward. This time, he listened. He lowered himself into the chair across from me, the same one Sandra Lopez used during foundation budget meetings, the same one that had held teachers, principals, even city council folks over the years. My son sat in it like he was on the witness stand. The Arthur Bennett Community Foundation, I said, incorporated December 1995, 1 year after your mother passed. He didn't say a word. We've funded 14 schools across Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, after-school programs in 6 Cincinnati zip codes, scholarship funds that have sent, last I checked, 231 kids to college, kids from neighborhoods like this one, kids who didn't grow up with what you had. I watched his face carefully. This building, I went on, was bought in 2001 with foundation money, new roof in 2009, gym added in 2011, full HVAC replacement in 2019, because the kids were sitting inside wearing coats, and I've always had a problem with that. He hadn't blinked in what felt like a full minute. The name on all the foundation paperwork, I added, is Thomas Bennett. My father's name. I used it because... I paused, choosing my words carefully, because I didn't want this turning into something it wasn't. It was never about credit. It was about Violet. The silence in that office got heavy, heavier than anything I'd heard all night, and that included standing out in a Cincinnati snowstorm 3 hours earlier. Dad. His voice had changed. The panic was gone. Something rarer had taken its place. How? Where did the money come from? You worked at the factory for 31 years. I did. I shifted my leg a little, careful with the knee. What I never told you, because I didn't think it mattered, was that your grandfather left me a decent amount when he passed in '93. Not a fortune, but enough. I put it into a trust the year after your mother died, and I never spent $1 of it on myself. I held his gaze. Not $1, Edward. It was always hers. Always meant for this. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and buried his face in his hands. I let him sit in that. Out in the hallway, I could hear the building still alive. Sandra Lopez talking calmly with a reporter. The quiet shuffle of the last few people who refused to leave until they knew I was okay. Somewhere out there, cameras were rolling, and someone was putting together a story you couldn't have made up if you tried. "Why didn't you tell me?" Edward finally asked. He looked up at me, eyes red. 30 years, Dad. I thought you just watched the History Channel and clipped coupons. He winced at himself. Because you would have told Monica Bennett, I said plainly. No soft edges left in me for this one. And Monica Bennett would have turned it into a conversation about money, about assets, inheritance, who's owed what. I gestured toward the window, toward Violet, toward all of it. This was never about assets, son. This was about your mother. About honoring her the only way I knew how when I couldn't do anything else. His jaw tightened. She deserved a monument, I said quietly, so I built her one. Just somewhere people could actually use it. Edward stood up slowly and walked over to the window. He just stood there, staring at her. The yellow dress, that laugh, the same laugh that used to fill our house on Maplewood like it had a life of its own. And for the first time, I watched my son see his mother the way I always had. Not just as a memory, but as something that kept going. A legacy. His shoulders shook once. He didn't turn around, and I respected that. Men like us, we're not always built to fall apart where people can see it. I probably had a hand in that. She would have hated this, he said, voice rough. The portrait, all this attention. She'd have been embarrassed. Then she'd have cried about it later, I said, and never admitted it. He let out this sound, half laugh, half something else. I hadn't heard that sound from him since he was a kid, maybe 9 years old. And in that moment, I didn't see Monica Bennett's husband, or the man who stood silent in that kitchen. I saw my son, the little boy who used to fall asleep on Violet's lap during thunderstorms and then act like it never happened the next morning. He turned around. Dad, what Monica Bennett said tonight, I'm not having that conversation tonight, I cut in. Tonight, I'm sitting here with a bad knee, lukewarm coffee, and exactly one apology I'm willing to hear, and that's yours. After that, I'm finding somewhere warm to sleep. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry, he said. No build-up, no excuses. I'm sorry I let her say that. I'm sorry I didn't step in. I should have. I let those words sit for a moment, just long enough. Alvarez knows a place I can stay tonight, I said. I asked if you'd stay with... I won't be staying at the house, Edward. He took that in, slow. Right. Then he pulled out his phone, and his face shifted again. You know that look when someone checks their screen and finds something they weren't ready for? Yeah, that one. He turned the phone toward me. 17 missed calls. Monica Bennett's mother. Monica Bennett's sister. 3 numbers he didn't recognize. And right at the top, a text from Monica Bennett herself. I had him read it out loud, twice, just to make sure I heard it right. They're saying on the news he built the whole community center. They're saying he's been funding schools for 30 years. Edward, my mother just called me. My sister just called me. Please tell me this isn't what it looks like. I didn't say a word. That should have been the moment I felt some kind of victory, right? Some rush of being proven right. Monica Bennett, who stood in that kitchen and called me a useless burden like she had all the facts, was now sitting there watching the 11 o'clock news realize just how wrong she'd been. But honestly, I just felt tired, old. Maybe a little sad that it took a snowstorm and a TV broadcast to get my own son to really see me. Still, underneath all that, there was something else. Something quiet, steady, and warm. Like Violet. Peace. Come here, I said. Edward stepped over and stood beside me. I reached up and rested my hand on his arm, the same way I used to when he was a kid and needed reminding the world wasn't ending. Your mother would have loved what this place turned into, I told him. And she would have loved you anyway. She always did. I gave his arm a small pat. You made that harder than it needed to be tonight, but she would have loved you anyway. He placed his hand over mine and didn't say a thing. That was fine. Some moments don't need words. I'd learned that from 30 years of doing something important without ever talking about it. A second later, Alvarez showed up in the doorway, reading the room the way only a man with 23 years on the force can. One glance, full understanding, no wasted questions. There's a reporter asking to speak with you, he said. Tell them. Give me 5 minutes. He nodded and pulled the door halfway shut behind him. I looked back at Edward. Then I glanced out through the tall front windows of the community center. Snow was still coming down. Over Westwood, over Boudinot and Epworth, over Montana Avenue, over the porch of the house I'd paid off, signed over, and been thrown out of, all in one lifetime. It was falling on 14 schools across 3 states, places where kids were sleeping tonight, kids who didn't know my name but were living inside something I built. And it was falling on that portrait, a woman in a yellow dress, laughing forever. Violet. I picked up my lukewarm coffee, finished it in one go, and set the cup down. Then I looked at my son again. "There's something else," I said. "Sit back down." He sat. I reached into my go bag, the one I packed 15 years ago for moments exactly like this, and pulled out a thick manila envelope, wrapped tight with a rubber band. My attorney's return address sat in the corner. "What is that?" Edward asked. "That," I said, setting it on the desk between us, "is my updated will, signed and filed 3 weeks ago." I watched his face carefully. "The house on Maplewood, the one I paid off and signed over to you, I've transferred it back into the foundation's name. It's going to be used as transitional housing for families in the after-school program." The color drained right out of him. "Dad." "Monica Bennett called it a burden," I said evenly. "I'm making sure it becomes one for 30 families who actually need it." We both looked down at the envelope. Monica Bennett. By now, she'd seen the news. No doubt about that. Her mother, her sister, probably half the neighborhood too. The same woman who called me a useless burden was now watching the evening news explain how that burden had quietly funded half the city while she was busy researching nursing homes. I hoped she was watching it from the living room. My living room, the one she said I took over. "Edward," I said, letting it settle. "She has 60 days to vacate. It's in the paperwork. My attorney sent it over this afternoon." He just stared at me for a long moment, like a man standing in a house that had shifted 6 inches to the left. Everything still there, but nothing where he remembered leaving it. "What about me?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, really looked at him. My son, the boy I carried on my shoulders, the one I taught to ride a bike on these same streets now buried under snow, the same man who stood silent while someone called his father a burden. "You," I said, "have a choice to make, and you've got about 60 days to figure it out." Then I stood up, slowly, carefully. That knee of mine complained every step of the way, but I didn't care. Out in the hallway, I could hear the reporter asking Sandra Lopez how long the foundation had been running. 30 years, she answered. And then came that silence, the kind people fall into when they realize they've been completely wrong about something. I knew that silence well. I'd been the center of it all night. Alvarez stepped back into the doorway. He looked at the envelope, then at Edward, then at me. "Ready?" he asked. "1 minute." I turned back to my son. He hadn't moved. That envelope sat between us like a final decision waiting to be accepted. "I am not a burden," I said calmly. "I never was." I picked up my go bag. "And the next person who tries to build a life on what I created while calling me useless," I paused just long enough for it to land, "is going to learn what this family has built, and that it was never meant for them." Then I walked past him, out the door and into the main hall. The reporter was waiting near the entrance. Young, serious, camera already rolling behind him. Sandra Lopez stood off to the side, carrying that quiet kind of pride that comes from holding a secret for 30 years and finally being allowed to let it go. I walked over, bad knee, old brown coat, and 3 decades of silence walking right alongside me, and stopped in front of that camera. Somewhere across Cincinnati, in a living room I used to own, Monica Bennett was watching the 11 o'clock news introduce the useless burden she'd just thrown out into the snow. I really hoped she was sitting in my chair. "Mr. Donovan," the reporter said, "can you tell us about the foundation?" I looked straight into that camera. 72 years old, 1 bad knee, wearing the same brown coat Violet bought me back in 2003, and not a single dollar of it ever spent on myself, because every bit of it was always hers. "It's a love story," I said. "Been going on for 30 years. Started the night my wife died, and it never stopped. Behind me, through the office door I'd left open, I heard it. Edward crying. Not the quiet, controlled kind. The real kind. the kind that comes when a man finally understands just how close he came to losing something that mattered. Good. Some lessons have to cost you before they stick. Violet always believed that. And she was usually right. The snow kept falling over Westwood. The camera kept rolling. And somewhere beneath a 6-foot portrait of a laughing woman in a yellow dress, and 30 years of silence, her story was finally, completely and permanently known. That was enough. More than enough. If this story stuck with you, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. There's more real, raw, family stories waiting for you.